As a Dutchman, I love to complain. It is part of my DNA, and I'm also a big fan of weaponry of all kinds. So today we are going to take a look at the weapons and armor of the Gerudo tribe from The Legend of Zelda, to see if they're any good. Could these swords, shields, spears and armor sets be useful in real life? Or is this nothing more than video game fiction? And what were they inspired by? Well, let's find out. Now, before the release of the Nintendo Switch Zelda games, the Gerudo used quite standard weapons. Only two types really. These swords, that are very similar to the ones seen in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and this spear, that is actually very different compared to what was seen in later games. So let's look at this spear for a second. It was seen in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, but they never really used them, which is a shame, because this weapon would be great in combat. You're able to do both stabbing and slashing attacks due to its design, which actually makes it a polearm and not a spear, with the inspiration most likely coming from the Japanese naginata. This weapon consists of a wooden or metal pole with a curved single-edged blade at the end of it. In many ways it's similar to other weapons of this type like the Chinese guandao or the European glaive. Now, similar to other Japanese weapons like the katana, naginata often have a round handguard between the blade and the shaft, and the blade is forged in the same manner as traditional Japanese swords, and it has a long tang that is placed in the wooden shaft to give it strength, because without it, it would snap off quite easily. Usually, this polearm is around 120 to 240 centimeters, which is massive. And I'm from the Netherlands, so that says something. Now, this weapon was originally used by the samurai class of feudal Japan, as well as foot soldiers and warrior monks. Hell, it was even an iconic weapon of the Onamusha, a type of female warrior belonging to the Japanese nobility. It could even be that the Gerudo using this weapon represents these ancient female warriors from Japan. They were well known and even fought alongside male samurais to protect their household, family, and honor in times of war, which is something I never knew or even realized. But I bet Nintendo included this weapon as some sort of historical Easter egg. But what about the weapons seen in the most recent titles? There they have all kinds of swords, shields, a bow, and even a completely different spear design. Well, let's start with this new glorified Pokestick, because it is very different from what was seen in earlier titles. When you look at it, you can see that in some ways it would be much less effective in a fight than the previous version. Its description says the following: this spear's center of gravity is in its tip, making it a bit unwieldy for the average fighter. But in the hands of a skilled Gerudo warrior, it's a weapon of reliable strength. And yeah, you can notice from the massive head that it must be front heavy, which is actually not a good thing for a spear or polearm because of the length of the weapon. You have a lever effect after all, which makes it even heavier, which is not a good thing. Meanwhile, you can't really use it to slash due to the prongs, although this could help with stabbing, but that really depends on how sharp these two spikes are. So in many ways, this weapon kind of sucks. The only advantage that it really has is that these two prongs could be used to trap a blade, which is a great strategy during a fight. Back in the day, weapons like sword breakers or catchers were used to get a hold of someone's sword, allowing you to strike or redirect it and then strike, which you could do with this spear as well. But aside from that, it's not a very good weapon. Design-wise, it kind of resembles a Yari, specifically this type, but not completely. This was a spear design that was used much later in Japan's history, when the naginata was already hundreds of years in use. Personally, I like the one they used in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask more. But what about their swords? Well, here they use various sizes of scimitars, just like they did in the older games, and these are a whole lot better. The curved blade allows for amazing cuts and slices, although as you can imagine, stabbing is not really possible. And in general, there are two types according to the in-game descriptions. The smaller one is often carried by Gerudo women for self-defense. Its short and curved blade is easily concealable, and this bigger one has Gerudo carvings that decorate the weapon. It's extremely sharp and is something that's also used for ceremonial purposes in festivals. Now both of these weapons are pretty well designed for the purpose they serve, and in the end, there's only one big difference between the two. The smaller one is clearly for self-defense. Back in the old days, carrying short swords or daggers for self-defense was common, but in a big all-out fight, this weapon is not ideal. Mainly because it's missing a crossguard, this little bit. The crossguard is a bar of metal at right angles to the blade, placed between the blade and the hilt, and its primary use case is protecting the wielder's hand from being sliced or cut off in battle, which is kind of crucial in an all-out fight. But luckily enough, the full-sized version does have it, and the version that Urbosa wears even has a basket hilt. This was the next evolution of the crossguard that protects the entire hand instead of just preventing an opponent's blade to slide down or partially blocking direct strikes at the hand. But where does the scimitar come from originally? Well, as you can imagine, its origin is most likely found in Middle Eastern, South Asian, or North African cultures. First being seen in Turkey. They were mostly used in horse warfare because of their relatively lightweight when compared to larger swords, and their curved design is great for slashing opponents while riding on a horse. These nomadic horsemen learned from experience that a curved edge is better for cutting strikes because the arc of the blade matches that of the sweep of the rider's arm as they slash the target while galloping. Turks, Mongols, Rajputs, and Sikhs used scimitars in warfare, among many other peoples, and did so effectively. Which makes it a bit weird that the Gerudo used them in the Legend of Zelda games, because we never ever see them use horses. The one place where their blade does best. In the end, a sword like this would be a better fit for the stable masters found around Hyrule after the Great Calamity, but they only carry spears as far as I've seen, which is also a good option on horseback. So while the one-handed swords of the Gerudo are excellent, they don't really fit their fighting style. And when it comes to the two-handed blade, well, that ain't stellar. As far as I can see, it doesn't represent any weapon from history. It isn't a classic claymore. Aside from that, it looks very clunky, with the blade being very thick and front-heavy, which would make it incredibly cumbersome to use. And I bet that a stab would also be hard to do. It's more like a mace than a sword, so it's not that great. Now at this point, we only have one weapon left, the Gerudo bow, also known as the golden bow. However, this one is not too special. Being designed for hunting and warfare, it does a good job, and the ornaments along its limbs are beautiful. But aside from that, it's just a standard recurve bow, which is a very efficient bow design due to these curved tips. These allow for the longest power stroke, aka the length that the string pushes the arrow, possible. Although the extra ornamentations on the limbs would lower its power. Moving that extra weight when you let the arrow fly does not help. And these have been used for centuries in the real world, and were only really replaced when guns became common. And since those haven't really taken over yet in the world of Zelda, they are used by everyone. Although I will say this specific design is not the best one, but that's a topic for another video. However, what about their defensive options, like their shields? Because they have a surprising amount of them. They have the Daybreaker, normal Gerudo shield, and even the Radiant shield. Overall, this is a great selection when it comes to sizes. The smaller round shields are great for the fast-paced and agile fighting style of the Gerudo, while the Radiant shield offers a bit more protection due to its bigger size. But there's one thing incredibly off about them. They seem to be completely made from metal. The description even says, the design of this metal shield has changed over time to match the Gerudo's sword and shield fighting style. And the fact that they are made out of this would make them quite bad. The weight would be insane, especially with all those decorations. It would be hell to deal with, and it's also something that is uncommon in the real world. Sure, you had something like bucklers, but those were significantly smaller than these shields. And aside from being heavy, it would also be incredibly expensive. But in general, it seems like the Gerudo are pretty well off. They are known for using insane amounts of gold and jewels in a lot of the stuff they wear and use. But who knows where they actually get it all from. But a shield is only one way to defend yourself. We all know that armor is also incredibly important. However, when it comes to this, the Gerudo don't have much, with the guards found around their settlements being a great example. They barely wear any actual armor, which is something we also saw in the older games. Sure, they wear bracers and greaves, but aside from that, they don't really have any protection aside from some form of armored bra. Oh yeah, and these rock hard abs, baby! But yeah, that's kind of it. And as you can imagine, this amount of armor will not protect you very well. And helmets are also not common. Sure, you have the Thunder Helm, but that is an heirloom. And as far as I can see, it's not really made for warfare. I mean, I bet you can barely see anything with that thing on. So unless you're fighting a beast that shoots lightning, it's not very useful. But there could be a reason for this. We have seen the Gerudo in games like Ocarina of Time rely on agility to win in a fight, using a combination of jumps, backflips, and quick attacks to defeat their foes. And in Breath of the Wild, we saw Urbosa doing a similar thing when fighting the two Yiga that ambushed her and Zelda, although she didn't really jump around or something. But this fighting style could explain the lack of armor, because with less leather and steel weighing you down, movement becomes a lot easier. So personally, I think they went with this design to complement their fighting style, although I will say it is a bit risky. Huge portions of their body are completely exposed, so any strike could deal major damage. It would be better if they added some lamellar armor like the Mongols used. These small overlapping metal plates offer great protection and movability, all while keeping weight at a minimum. But it could also be that they don't need this due to their rock hard abs. Now in general, what do I think of the Gerudo weapons and armor? Well, I have mixed emotions. While all the weapons, shields, and armor sets have a beautiful design and can be great in game, a lot of them don't make much sense. In the end, only the one-handed swords they used would be amazing, especially on horseback. And I think it's a bit disappointing that Nintendo didn't add a damage bonus to these swords while on horseback. But still, I would give the weapons, shields, and armor of the Gerudo a solid 4 out of 10. I think there's a lot that could be improved. But what do you think of the Gerudo armor set? Let me know down below. Aside from that, be ssure to like and subscribe because it really helps and more videos are on the way.